For decades, the British royal family has existed under a veil of carefully crafted tradition, power, and silence. But now, that veil has been lifted. A former royal nanny once tasked with raising the heirs to the throne has broken that silence. In a revelation that could shatter the monarchy's pristine image, her voice, long muted by royal protocol and fear of reprisal, now echoes with chilling clarity. What she claims Queen Camilla did to Princess Diana's children is not just a personal grievance, it is a bombshell that questions the moral compass of the entire institution. The nanny, once a silent pillar in the palace walls, wasn't just a caretaker. She was a witness. A witness to the chaos behind the royal facade. She served through the emotional roller coaster of Diana's final years and into the uneasy transition that followed her death. A time when Camilla quietly moved from the shadows to the spotlight. Her words now come not from bitterness, but from deep concern for two boys who lost their mother too soon and were allegedly pushed into emotional turbulence at the hands of someone they never fully accepted. Her role in the household was vital. She provided not only the daily structure and emotional support every child needs, but also shielded the young princes from the political war erupting in their own family. Her testimony doesn't read like tabloid gossip. It reads like a heartbreaking record of neglect, subtle manipulation, and quiet pain inflicted under the guise of royal duty. And while her revelations might come years after Diana's tragic death, they carry the weight of truth unspoken and wounds unhealed. The strained relationship between Diana and Camilla has been the subject of speculation for years, but the nanny confirms what many suspected, that there was no reconciliation, no forgiveness, and no effort to bridge the damage caused. She paints a picture of a household at war with itself, where the boys were pulled between loyalty to their mother's memory and the growing presence of a woman they blamed for her suffering. It wasn't just cold glances or avoidance, it was something deeper, something insidious. A campaign, she suggests, to slowly rewrite the boys' emotional reality in Camilla's favor. The public may have gradually warmed to Camilla, but behind palace walls, the story was different. According to the nanny, the princes felt abandoned, confused, and in time, angry. And while the monarchy put on a united front for the cameras, the emotional toll behind closed doors was far more complicated. The nanny, watching it all unfold in real time, saw the sharp contrast between the public illusion of healing and the private fracture that never truly mended. Why is she speaking out now? The timing is crucial. With King Charles's health in question and the future of the monarchy more uncertain than ever, she believes the truth matters more than protection. And with Prince William stepping into a more prominent leadership role, she hopes her words can offer clarity, perhaps even healing, before history repeats itself in the next generation. And in the backdrop of it all lies the ever-present power of media. The nanny calls it both a weapon and a shield used by the palace to shape perception, and by the public to form judgment. She believes the media missed the real story, not in its scandals or divorces, but in the silent transformation of two innocent children into public figures raised under emotional siege. To understand the gravity of these revelations, we must first delve into the complex dynamics within the royal household. Behind the palace walls, the nanny was often the only constant in the lives of the royal children, witnessing firsthand the tensions that unfolded. While titles changed, relationships soured, and public sentiment swayed with every tabloid headline, her presence remained steady, a quiet guardian in the storm. Far from just a caretaker, she became a confidant, an emotional anchor, and, in many ways, a silent witness to the unraveling of the royal household from the perspective of the children at its heart. Her day didn't begin with glamour. It began with structure, breakfasts, school runs, bedtime stories, and the delicate balancing act of raising children who bore the crushing weight of a crown they hadn't yet earned. But the role of a royal nanny extended far beyond those visible duties. She was expected to instill values while simultaneously preparing the boys for a life of service and spectacle. And when the cameras disappeared and the courtiers faded into the background, she remained. She saw what others didn't, and what many preferred to ignore. What made her bond with William and Harry so unique was not her position, but her consistency. In a home increasingly fractured by betrayal, scandal, and public shame, she was the only figure who never wavered. She saw their joy during the early years when Diana, radiant and warm, filled their lives with color and affection. But she also saw the shift. The smiles began to fade, the laughter softened, and confusion crept into the boys' eyes as their parents' marriage crumbled before them. She heard the whispers behind closed doors, the tears muffled into pillows, and the silence that settled over the nursery like a shadow. She observed what no official statement ever acknowledged: the emotional war waged between Diana and Charles, with Camilla always lingering like a ghost between them. The children were never directly involved, yet they felt the sting. The nanny remembers how their behavior changed after overhearing arguments or noticing their mother's pained expressions. William would withdraw, trying to protect Harry by pretending everything was fine. Harry, younger and more expressive, would act out in confusion. And there she was, left to translate the royal chaos into something a child could understand. What struck the nanny most was the duality of it all. Publicly, the royal family projected unity, dignity, and order. But behind the palace doors, the reality was far more human and far more heartbreaking. She saw Charles wrestle with duty versus desire, Diana crumble under the pressure of betrayal, and Camilla step further into the royal frame without ever fully earning her place in the hearts of the children. And in all of this, she was expected to keep silent, to smile through dinners, and to maintain a perfect professional mask while protecting two emotionally scarred boys. And yet, despite the burdens, the nanny doesn't speak of her time with resentment. Her reflections are steeped in love for the children, for their resilience, and for the memories of moments that were real and untainted. A birthday celebration away from photographers, a heartfelt question whispered before bed, or the simple act of a child reaching for her hand when the world became too loud. These are the memories she treasures. But they're also the reason she finally decided to speak. Because for too long, the narrative has been dictated by those with power or privilege. And while the palace may control press briefings and public appearances, it cannot erase the lived experiences of those who stood quietly in the background and bore witness to the truth. The nanny's voice, once muted, now roars with the urgency of protecting the past from being rewritten and protecting the boys she once raised from being used as pawns in someone else's redemption arc. While the nanny provided care and stability, the relationship between Diana and Camilla was anything but harmonious. What was once a friendship between Diana and Camilla deteriorated into a rivalry that would affect the royal family for years to come. In the beginning, Diana was young, wide-eyed, and full of hope. She saw Camilla as a supportive acquaintance, perhaps even a friend. The two women moved in similar circles, exchanged pleasantries, and stood side by side at public functions. But beneath the surface, something was already simmering. Diana would later confess that she always felt Camilla's presence, like a shadow lurking behind every royal duty. And in time, she realized that this woman wasn't just a lingering figure from Charles's past, she was very much part of his present. The turning point wasn't just one moment. It was a slow, corrosive unraveling. A phone call that lasted too long. A conversation abruptly cut off when Diana entered the room. A gift that didn't feel like it belonged. Diana's instincts sharpened, and what once seemed harmless became a haunting pattern. Then came the famous confrontation. Diana, heartbroken and defiant, cornered Camilla at a party. Her words were raw, unforgettable. "I know what's going on between you and Charles." Camilla, stunned but composed, responded with a cruel calmness. She wasn't going to back down. In that moment, the line was drawn, and the palace would never be the same again. Behind palace gates, the tension was undeniable. Diana withdrew emotionally. Camilla became more confident. Charles, trapped between guilt and desire, refused to take full accountability. He fed both women crumbs of attention, but never enough to satisfy either. The love triangle was no longer private. It was a storm devouring the monarchy from within. And when Diana poured her heart out in that infamous BBC interview speaking of 3 people in this marriage, the damage was beyond repair. That wasn't just a scandal. It was an emotional explosion that forced every wall of royal denial to crack. Privately, there were moments of silence that screamed louder than arguments. Diana would retreat into her role as a mother, trying desperately to shield William and Harry from the emotional warfare. Camilla, emboldened by her history with Charles, made her presence known in subtle yet devastating ways. Diana's sense of isolation deepened, and while the palace tried to mediate, they underestimated the depth of the betrayal. There were no easy apologies, no secret resolutions, only two women locked in a war neither of them wanted, but both refused to abandon. The media turned this bitter feud into a royal soap opera. Photographers stalked their every move. Tabloids distorted truths and sold sensationalism. But buried beneath those headlines was a real human tragedy. Diana, loved by the people yet vilified by the crown, fought for dignity in a palace that no longer protected her. Camilla, cast as the other woman, began a slow, calculated rise from scandal to acceptance. And Charles, he was no longer seen as the fairy tale prince, but the man who broke a princess. Their fractured relationship left an indelible mark on the monarchy. Public trust fractured. The illusion of perfection shattered. And when Diana died, the tension didn't die with her, it shifted, morphed, and spread to the next generation. Camilla's future as queen consort would forever carry the stain of Diana's pain, and the royal family's struggle to repair its image would be haunted by the legacy of betrayal, silence, and unresolved grief. Amidst this turmoil, the children were not mere bystanders. They were deeply affected by the unfolding drama. For Princes William and Harry, childhood was a blend of privilege and public scrutiny, with few moments of normalcy. Born into global fascination and burdened with unimaginable expectation, they were the faces of a fairy tale that the world desperately wanted to believe in. But inside the palace, their story was far more painful, laced with confusion, heartbreak, and emotional neglect that would shape the men they became. To the world, they were symbols of royal continuity. To themselves, they were two boys trying to make sense of a family that was slowly coming apart. From the beginning, their bond with Princess Diana was unmistakable. She was their safe space, warm, spontaneous, and fiercely protective. She took them to theme parks, let them eat fast food, and introduced them to a life beyond the palace gates. In her eyes, they weren't heirs to the throne, they were her sons, first and always. But even as she fought to give them a taste of freedom, the cracks in her marriage began to deepen. And the boys, sensitive and observant, absorbed more than anyone realized. They could sense her pain, her loneliness, and her desperation to hold on to what little control she had left. The love was never in question, but neither was the looming storm. When Diana and Charles finally separated, the emotional ground beneath William and Harry collapsed. The palace attempted to maintain order, school routines were kept, schedules followed, but the damage was already done. The safe, predictable world their mother tried to build for them was replaced with tension, unpredictability, and the unspoken knowledge that their family was broken. Charles grew more distant, immersed in royal duties and increasingly public ties with Camilla. The boys were left in an emotional tug-of-war, caught between a mother who wore her heart on her sleeve and a father who often seemed more committed to image than intimacy. And all the while, the cameras never stopped. Every soccer game, every school play, every awkward teenage moment was captured and dissected by the press. The tabloid obsession wasn't just with Diana, it extended to her sons. The public watched them grieve, smile, stumble, and grow, as if their lives were a televised performance. The trauma of being perpetually watched left scars that wouldn't surface until adulthood. They were taught to smile on cue, to show strength in public, and to never reveal just how fractured they felt inside. But behind those smiles were children trying to navigate loss, confusion, and betrayal. Through it all, there was one person who offered them steady ground, their nanny. She was their guide, their listener, and often the only adult who understood the depth of what they were going through. When Diana wasn't there, it was the nanny who held them when the tears came. When they were forced to attend royal functions they didn't understand. It was she who whispered calming reassurances. She knew when William was pretending to be strong and when Harry needed space to cry. Her role wasn't just practical, it was emotional salvation in a household that often demanded emotional suppression. One memory the nanny shared quietly, without spectacle, was of a young William staying up late, worried for his mother, asking questions no child should have to ask. Another involved Harry hiding in a corner, overwhelmed by reporters during a holiday, his small frame curled into itself. These were not moments of royal glamour, they were moments of raw, human vulnerability that no title could protect them from. As the boys grew older, the emotional fallout followed them. William learned to compartmentalize, to lead with duty, and keep his personal life tightly guarded. Harry rebelled, angry, impulsive, desperate to escape the pressures of a system that had never protected his mother. Both paths were forged by the same pain. The same childhood defined by public adoration and private abandonment. As the princes navigated their tumultuous childhoods, the royal family's internal dynamics continued to evolve. While publicly maintaining a composed demeanor, Camilla's actions behind palace doors painted a different picture. To the public, she evolved from a scandalous mistress into a poised consort. But within the gilded walls of the monarchy, her rise to power left ripples, some of them quiet, others unmistakably jarring. After marrying Prince Charles, Camilla entered, not just into matrimony, but into an institution desperately trying to rebuild its image after the death of Princess Diana. What unfolded behind closed doors, however, suggests her influence was far more disruptive than polished statements ever revealed. In the royal household, rank is power. And once Camilla became the Duchess of Cornwall, she exercised that power with careful calculation. While she never attempted to emulate Diana's warmth, she made efforts to claim a place of relevance in William and Harry's lives, efforts that, according to insiders, were met with cold indifference at best and resistance at worst. The Nanny recalls moments when the boys were forced into joint appearances with Camilla before they were ready. Behind smiles and wave-for-the-camera optics, tension seethed. Harry, especially, struggled with the presence of the woman he had once blamed for his parents' pain. William, though more diplomatic, never fully let her in. Reports from those closest to the family point to specific incidents that exposed the cracks. One involved a family dinner where Camilla allegedly made a cutting remark about Diana's media legacy, brushing aside the very grief that still haunted the young princes. Another moment unfolded when Harry asked a question about his mother during a holiday event, only to be met with a dismissive response that left the room in stunned silence. These weren't overt acts of cruelty, they were subtle erasures. Quiet attempts to shift the narrative, to edge Diana's presence further into the background. But the children noticed, and so did the Nanny. Within the palace, Camilla's presence also tilted the delicate balance of power. With Charles increasingly deferring to her counsel, longtime aides who had once worked closely with Diana found themselves sidelined or reassigned. Rooms were redecorated, protocols restructured. And while these changes were framed as modernizing efforts, insiders believe they reflected Camilla's desire to reshape the royal environment to her liking, one that had no place for ghosts of the past, even if those ghosts still lived in the hearts of the heirs. What made the situation even more jarring was the jarring disconnect between public appearances and private reality. In front of cameras, Camilla smiled, supported charities, and appeared every bit the benevolent consort. But the Nanny witnessed a woman far more concerned with perception than emotional connection. The boys, trained from birth to present royal grace, maintained their roles with practiced ease. Yet behind their guarded expressions was a shared understanding. Camilla was tolerated, not loved. And behind the scenes, she had far more influence than anyone dared admit. Some members of the royal family remained skeptical of her rapid ascent. Princess Anne, ever blunt, was rumored to have voiced concerns about Camilla's effect on Charles's decision-making. Even the Queen, while offering public acceptance, kept her distance in private affairs for years. The atmosphere inside the palace shifted. Camilla wasn't just a new face, she was a force that quietly reshaped dynamics, alliances, and even the emotional tone of family gatherings. It wasn't hostility, but it certainly wasn't harmony. As the media began to catch wind of subtle tensions, coverage began to split. Some praised Camilla for helping Charles regain his footing. Others questioned the erasure of Diana's memory and the emotional discomfort it caused William and Harry. Tabloids fueled speculation, but it was the silent glances, the forced smiles, and the uncomfortable body language that told the real story. For every headline that framed Camilla as a unifier, there were whispers of unresolved pain festering behind palace walls. The Nanny's recent statements shed light on the complexities of royal relationships and their impact on the family. After years of silence, the nanny has shared her first-hand accounts, offering a rare glimpse into the royal household. Her voice, once stifled by duty, discretion, and fear of reprisal, now pierces through the polished surface of palace protocol with truths that many long suspected, but few dared to confirm. Her revelations do not come with malice, nor with scandalous embellishment. They come with the quiet weight of lived experience, of nights spent comforting confused boys, of watching love fracture into obligation, and of witnessing a woman named Camilla step into a space that had barely cooled from Diana's tragic absence. One incident she recalls still haunts her. It was shortly after Charles and Camilla had made their relationship public. The princes were summoned for a family function, one of those carefully staged events designed to display unity. But behind the grand staircase, Harry refused to come down. He was 10. Furious, eyes red, he had just heard Camilla refer to Diana in what the nanny described as an offhanded, dismissive tone. William tried to coax his brother into silence, but the nanny saw it clearly. This wasn't a tantrum. This was grief, clashing with the image the palace demanded they present. That moment, she said, crystallized the depth of resentment the boys still carried and how ill-prepared the family was to address it. She speaks, too, of subtle manipulations, moments where Camilla allegedly tried to assert herself into maternal roles, correcting Harry at dinner, redirecting William during public appearances. Small acts, perhaps, to the outside world, but to children mourning a mother who had barely been laid to rest in their hearts. These gestures landed like trespasses. The nanny says the boys noticed every word, every glance, and what they didn't say often spoke louder than anything else. Over time, their silence around Camilla wasn't a mark of respect. It was a strategy, an armor. Watching this unfold from her trusted place just outside the frame, the nanny also grew disillusioned with the media's narrative. The press, desperate to rehabilitate Camilla's image, began painting her as a stabilizing figure, a savior to a lonely prince, a modern face of the monarchy. But the nanny knew a different version, one where emotional truths were sacrificed for optics, where the very real trauma of two boys was brushed aside in favor of glowing profiles and staged family portraits. She remembers reading headlines, praising Camilla's relationship with the princes and thinking, "You weren't there the night Harry cried himself to sleep. You didn't see the way William flinched when her name was mentioned." She watched the shifting alliances within the palace, the glances exchanged at dinners, the way Charles leaned increasingly on Camilla and distanced himself from his sons' emotional lives. She saw how some senior royals embraced the new narrative while others remained uneasy. And she saw, most of all, the emotional cost of this evolution, a cost that was borne not by the crown, but by the children caught in its machinery. Still, for years, she remained silent. She believed in loyalty. She believed in protecting the privacy of the boys she once tucked into bed. But now, as time has passed and wounds have calcified into memory, she has chosen to speak. Not to wound, not to sensationalize, but to tell the truth. While the world still cares to listen, her silence was never consent. And her story, though whispered in private for decades, now echoes loudly in a world desperate for authenticity. These revelations have reignited public interest in the royal family's private affairs. The nannies. Disclosures have sparked a wave of reactions, from shock to skepticism, across the globe. The moment her words reached the public, a deep current of emotional memories surged to the surface. For some, it felt like the final piece in a puzzle. They had suspected all along, a confirmation that the carefully polished royal narrative was, in fact, a veiled performance. For others, it opened fresh wounds that had never fully healed since Diana's death. People remembered the haunting image of two young boys walking behind their mother's coffin. And now, years later, they were forced to reconsider what and who surrounded them during that traumatic time. The media descended like vultures, feeding on every detail of the nanny's revelations. Headlines screamed betrayal, power struggles, and emotional manipulation. Morning news shows debated her credibility, while evening panels dissected her motives. Some networks hailed her as a brave truth-teller, finally giving voice to what had long been silenced. Others questioned her timing, her discretion, even her mental state. But beneath the noise, One fact remained undeniable. She had changed the Chadi'i conversation. The carefully curated royal image, decades in the making, was now tainted with a raw and undeniable humanity that many had never seen so clearly. Support poured in from Diana loyalists, those who had always believed that Camilla's acceptance came at a moral cost the palace never acknowledged. They praised the nanny for protecting Diana's legacy and speaking up for the sons she once raised. But the criticism was just as fierce. Some accused the nanny of exploiting private memories for attention. Others questioned the fairness of dredging up painful history at a time when the royal family was already navigating crisis after crisis. But to the nanny, it was never about public approval. It was about truth, and finally unburdening herself of secrets too heavy to carry into silence. Inside the palace, the walls were reportedly rattled. Royal insiders offered polite, guarded statements. No comment, respect for privacy, old wounds revisited. But whispers leaked. Senior courtiers were said to be furious. Advisors scrambled to control the narrative. Even former staff members began quietly validating pieces of the nanny's Tautoi account. Royal commentators walked a delicate line acknowledging her service, but reminding the public of the complexities of memory. Yet the truth lingered. Her voice had pierced the bubble of royal untouchability, and there was no stuffing it back. Into silence. Social media erupted into a frenzy. Hashtags supporting the nanny trended within hours. Clips of her statements went viral. Emotional testimonies from fans, trauma survivors, and even mental health advocates flooded platforms. TikTok creators unpacked timelines, body language experts broke down old footage, and digital sleuths resurfaced past interviews that now carried haunting new weight. It wasn't just a news story, it had become a reckoning, a public re-examination of one of the most mythologized families in modern history. And inevitably, comparisons emerged. The nanny's revelations echoed the chaos of the Diana tapes, the Meghan and Harry interviews, the infamous BBC confession. Each event had promised to lift the curtain, but this, coming from a silent observer, felt different. It wasn't about image. It wasn't about politics. It was about the children, their grief, their confusion, their silent suffering. And for many, that made the revelations harder to ignore. As the public digests these revelations, the royal family faces renewed scrutiny and reflection. In the aftermath of these revelations, the royal family stands at a crossroads, with lessons to be learned from the past. The silence that once protected the monarchy now threatens to erode it. The nanny's voice, quiet for decades, has pierced the firmament of royal tradition, leaving a trail of uncomfortable truths in its wake. And now, the institution long guarded by pageantry and protocol must decide whether to continue shielding itself behind polished facades or embrace the raw, often messy reality of being human. Because beneath the crowns, the bloodline, and the ancient rites, are people flawed, vulnerable, and deeply affected by the choices they make and the secrets they bury. If the monarchy hopes to endure, it must prioritize transparency. Not just in press statements or televised addresses, but in its very culture. The idea that dignity can only be maintained through silence has proven false. Silence, in fact, has bred more harm than protection. It allowed emotional wounds to fester. It turned family pain into public scandal. And it created an environment where loyalty was often mistaken for suppression. The royal family cannot afford to make that mistake again. Not if they want the trust of a public that increasingly values truth over tradition. Just as vital is the need for genuine connection, especially within its own walls. Emotional distance may once have been viewed as regal, but today it reads as cold. If anything has become painfully clear, it's that no title can replace the warmth of a parent, the comfort of honesty, or the strength found in vulnerability. William and Harry, for all their differences now, were shaped by the emotional vacuum that followed their mother's death. Their pain was not born of external attacks, but of internal failures. For the next generation, that cycle must be broken. History cannot be rewritten, but it can inform what comes next. The monarchy must confront its past, without flinching acknowledge its failures, and use them as a guide rather than a weight. The attempt to rehabilitate reputations at the expense of emotional truth, to move on without healing, has only bred resentment and division. Diana's story is no longer just a chapter. It's the foundation upon which the monarchy's modern evolution depends. To ignore it, or to obscure it, would be a disservice not only to her memory, but to every member of the family still grappling with her absence. Public perception will continue to shape the monarchy's survival. In an era defined by instant access and global conversations, the palace no longer controls the narrative, it participates in it. Authenticity is no longer optional, it's demanded. And while the royal mystique may have once relied on distance, its future relies on closeness, on showing not just the institution, but the individuals within it. If they are to lead, they must be seen as real, hurt, healing, honest. Some reforms may seem symbolic, allowing greater emotional support for young royals, redefining roles to include mental health advocacy, modernizing communication practices. But symbolic change leads to cultural change. And culture, more than tradition, will determine the monarchy's future relevance. Diana didn't just shift the public's expectations, she rewrote them, and her legacy, as complicated and heartbreaking as it is, remains the monarchy's greatest opportunity to grow. As the monarchy evolves, the echoes of the past continue to resonate, guiding its path forward. The royal family's journey is one of complexity, emotion, and public fascination, with each revelation adding depth to their story. The nanny's voice, long muted by loyalty, and the weight of royal expectation, has peeled back layers of myth and ceremony to expose the raw truth, hidden beneath the crown. Her disclosures were not wild accusations, but painful memories etched into years of silent service. From Camilla's quiet manipulation to the emotional toll inflicted upon Diana's sons, her words have reshaped how we view a dynasty once thought untouchable. The impact has been seismic, not just in tabloid headlines or expert commentary, but in the very heart of public trust. Once adored for its symbolism and grandeur, the royal family now walks a razor-thin line between reverence and relevance. This isn't about scandal anymore, it's about accountability, and whether the institution can survive the weight of its past while stepping into a future that demands transparency and authenticity. At its core, this is a reminder of what royalty often forgets, that behind the titles are people. People who hurt, who mourn, who grow up under impossible scrutiny. The monarchy's power lies not in its perfection, but in its ability to evolve while honoring its humanity. That evolution cannot happen without first acknowledging the suffering swept under its own red carpets. The nanny's account has done more than cast light on old wounds, it's opened a conversation that must never again be buried. Balancing duty with family, image with truth, tradition with change, these are the challenges the royal family must now face head-on. Because this isn't just their legacy, it's the story of a nation still watching, still wondering, still caring. As history unfolds, the stories of those within the royal family continue to captivate and inform our understanding of monarchy. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.